All hell just broke loose as the Trump regime purported to give its first congressional briefing regarding the Memorandum of Understanding. I say purported because it was a conference call with Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner with members of Congress in the House and in the United States Senate. All hell broke loose because when members of Congress asked some very basic questions about the Memorandum of Understanding, like who drafted it, who came up with the terms, hey, Steve Witkoff, are you still doing business in the Middle East? What is your actual role, Witkoff? Is this a real MOU? Is this binding? What happens next? Apparently, Rubio and Witkoff and others from the Trump regime just started yelling and screaming at members of Congress, including some MAGA Republican Congress members who were on the call. You had Democratic Congresswoman Dean asking some very basic questions, and Witkoff started screaming at her and saying, "That's a dumbass question. Do not ask me about any of my business dealings in the Middle East, and stop asking me who wrote this MOU. You're going to just sit there and you're going to listen to my briefing." And notably, this was a conference call. These Trump regime individuals didn't even have the decency to do it in person and actually be cross-examined and get asked tough questions. Let me just show you as Democratic Congresswoman Dean recounts being yelled at by Witkoff and Rubio, and they basically muted her from the line and wouldn't let her ask any questions. What the hell kind of briefing was this supposed to be? What was this? I mean, seriously. Here, play this clip.
He cut my mic off and said that he called my question smart-assed and stupid, cut my mic off and said, "There's your answer."
Then Mikkel Schnell over at MS Now recounts what went down when you had MAGA Republican Congress member Rich McCormick asking Rubio some very basic questions. And McCormick says, "I don't really understand the MOU. Is this a binding document? How would you really describe this, Rubio? Because you've been out there saying it's really just a negotiating framework and don't worry about the actual terms. So what is it, Rubio?" To which Rubio said, quote, "No one is here under any illusion that this is easy or even likely in some cases. This is not likely. There's a reason why this has been going on for 47 years, but we're going to give it an opportunity." This comes at the same time that we've heard from Israeli intelligence from the Netanyahu regime, and they've been talking to I-24 News and others, saying really what this is all about is Donald Trump's trying to keep power in the House and the Senate. And as soon as the elections are over, there's going to be a massive war with Iran, the third round. We've heard from Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, and he gave a speech today saying, "We are preparing for war. This is not a real MOU, and we're working with Rubio, and we've got our people in the Trump regime, not J.D. Vance." By the way, hasn't J.D. Vance got awfully silent? "We're ready to go back into war. We're not leaving Syria. We're not leaving Lebanon. We're not leaving Gaza. There will never be a two-state solution and while Netanyahu is in power." That's what they are saying. I'll show you the receipts just so you can see how the American people are being lied to as the Trump regime continues to manipulate the markets. And it should be noted that the Trump regime sent Witkoff and Kushner to show up in Doha in Qatar to meet with the Qatari mediators. And you know who's not going to be there? Iran. Iran's made it very clear as of last week. They reinforced it yesterday. Why would we go? Why would we have these discussions? You continue to say you're going to invade us. You continue to violate the MOU. You struck the Strait of Hormuz. You struck Sirik and Keshem on Friday and Saturday, and then you manipulated the market and say we're having talks. We're not having talks with you. Donald Trump posted, "Iran has requested a meeting." Iran's like, "No, we didn't. We're not showing up." Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson, "We're not having a meeting. You're just lying about what happens next." And so that's the reality of what's taken place. Let me share with you what Congresswoman Kamlager-Dove told the MeidasTouch network about this so-called briefing as well. And she goes, what Rubio was forced to admit to us while we were basically, they were yelling at us, we were saying, what the hell is this? And Rubio was like, yeah, the difference between Obama's JCPOA and this MOU is that the JCPOA was an actual deal. And Rubio was saying that to criticize the JCPOA. He's like, the problem with it, it was a real deal, it was binding, but we pulled ourselves out of this. The great news about this MOU is that we're not even really going to acknowledge the terms, and we're just going to pretend it's a thing. And Iran realizes that. Take a listen to what Kamlager-Dove, Congresswoman Kamlager-Dove, told the MeidasTouch network. Here, play this clip.
So, real quick, tell us about this briefing call today with the intel community.
Oh, this call with Secretary Marco Rubio about this Iran deal.
Right.
Yes, it was enlightening. As I shared, the last time I did one of these briefings, we had members on there talking about aliens in the sky. So I have a very low bar for the kinds of information that's going to come out of this. But I have to say, the highlight or low light for me was when Secretary Rubio was asked about the difference between this MOU and JCPOA, and Marco Rubio essentially said the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, Obama's nuclear deal, was a real agreement with criteria and benchmarks and thresholds, and this MOU is just a signed piece of paper saying we're going to continue to talk about talking. So you should ask yourself, $100 and something billion later, what are these people doing with our money and our national security?
Got it. Thank you so much, Congresswoman.
And then let me just show you a longer clip right here of what Congresswoman Dean said went down on that call with Rubio and Witkoff when she was asking some very basic questions about who drafted it. Witkoff, what's your business interest? Jared Kushner, you still raising another $4 to $5 billion in the Middle East while you're doing these negotiations? Under what authority do you think you have the ability to negotiate on behalf of the United States when nobody has appointed you at all? And then these, then apparently Witkoff and others said, don't you dare challenge us. Excuse me, Congress, that's a co-equal branch of government. We don't know who the hell you are, Witkoff. We know you're in love with Vladimir Putin, and you framed a note where Vladimir Putin talked to you about 3x5 in reference to taking over Donbass and portions of Ukraine. We know you're a weirdo Putin sycophant, and you have a very shady background in your real estate dealings. Why the hell are you out there continuing to negotiate on behalf of, who the hell are you, Witkoff, for real? Here, play this clip of what Congresswoman Dean says. Let's play it.
I want you to tell us what happened in today's Iran conference call with Rubio and Witkoff.
And this is an important day. And strangely, as we're taking in these Supreme Court decisions and the rant and raving of the president, we had a conference call. It was not a classified call with Secretary Rubio and Mr. Witkoff. And it was bipartisan, members of Congress, House members, Republicans, Democrats. Mr. Rubio gave a very brief opening, just talking about the shots back and forth over the course of the last 4 days, then sent it open to questions. We didn't learn much of anything. I have to be very, very honest with you. And it was all based on talking about the MOU, the 14-point MOU. I did ask a set of questions to the secretary and to Mr. Witkoff, which really piqued his ire. He cut my mic off and said that he called my question smart-assed and stupid, cut my mic off and said, there's your answer. I was simply asking tough questions about who wrote the MOU. Why does it sound so in favor of Iran? And from literally paragraph 1 were already out of sync with what was to happen. I also mentioned the fact, and I think we should never forget, that in this reckless, unconstitutional war, which is what I said to the gentleman on the call, 13 service members have died. We must never forget that. Hundreds have been wounded and thousands of civilians killed throughout the region. But he called me smart-assed, stupid. I think this diplomat or would-be diplomat's been hanging around the president too much.
Wow. Did anyone object to the Secretary of State speaking to you in that manner at all?
On a chain for members, my colleagues were outraged, said it's unacceptable, disrespectful. Madeleine was simply asking tough questions. I added to the question, just to be completely transparent, and I think it's a fair question. I asked Mr. Witkoff, I said, in your work, how much of your work in the region is for the United States of America and resolving these issues, and how much of your time is being spent on your own ventures? That, I think, really ticked them off. And that's when I got cut off.
And now let me interrupt for a moment with some major news that's not getting enough attention. The Trump administration just announced it's spending another $765 million in taxpayer money to cancel 4 offshore wind projects. Under this deal, Chicago-based energy developer Invenergy will surrender its offshore wind leases in the New York Bight, off California's Central Coast, and in the Gulf of Maine. And in return, the federal government will reimburse the company $765 million, with Invenergy saying that it plans to redirect much of that money into building new natural gas power plants in states like Indiana, Wisconsin, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri, along with some geothermal projects. This is now the 3rd major lease buyout by the Trump administration, bringing the total taxpayer cost to roughly $2.5 billion, billion with a B, to get companies to abandon offshore wind development, all because of Trump's bizarre crusade against wind energy. This announcement comes just after the administration dropped its appeal in a lawsuit brought by 17 states after a federal court ruled its attempt to broadly halt wind development offshore was unlawful. And rather than continuing that legal fight, the administration is now pursuing this different strategy, paying more companies to walk away from clean energy projects instead. So now taxpayers are being forced to bankroll the cancellation of renewable energy projects that were expected to provide electricity to millions and millions of people, as other countries like China continue to expand their investments in clean energy like wind. What do you think about the Trump administration's use of taxpayer money to cancel clean energy projects? How important is climate policy to you? And what are your thoughts on our climate coverage here at MeidasTouch? Now is the time that I need to hear from you, so leave a comment below and let me know what you think. Okay, Ben, back to you.
Because we should have a serious conversation. If there was a real brief, what would be discussed? What would be discussed is we're learning, and again, that you're not hearing this in many other places, that the retaliatory strikes by Iran on the American military bases after the U.S. hit Sirak and Keshem were very serious strikes on Bahrain, the Fifth Fleet, as well as in Kuwait and an American Air Force base there. As a source very close to MB Ghalibaf explains, Iran has destroyed all the new military infrastructure of the United States in 8 locations, including the Ali Al-Sam Air Base in Kuwait and the Salman Air Base in Bahrain during the attacks that took place in response to the U.S. striking Keshem and Sirak. So that should be included in the briefings, right? But the Trump regime is covering that up. What should also be included in the briefing is, again, who drafted the MOU, but the Trump regime doesn't want to talk about that document because the Trump regime just is doing what they can do to manipulate the markets. And if you want to hear the perspective of what Rubio and Netanyahu are talking about and why Rubio entered into the Lebanon MOU, the Lebanon MOU framework was intended to go after Iran, basically, and to remove Iran from the deconfliction cell that J.D. Vance agreed that Iran could have in the Iran MOU and the subsequent technical talks that took place in Bergenstock in Switzerland during that Lake Lausanne summit 2 weeks ago or so. And so Rubio and Netanyahu working to undermine the J.D. Vance MOU. And from Israel's perspective, they are ready to invade. They're going to go and invade Iran and bring Trump into this in a few months, maybe earlier. But it's a foregone conclusion that the war starts right when the midterms are over. I mean, that's how it's being talked about. That's the type of, that should be news to the American people. And that's the type of stuff that we should hear because this is causing massive devastation here in the United States. So let me show you. This is the former Israel consul in Los Angeles on I-24 News. And here's what he has to say about what's going down. Here, play this clip.
So what we'll see is negotiations and more negotiations till November. And then, everything will be opened again because the midterm would pass and Trump would be a bit more free to do what he wants. Clearly, one last point is that the Iranians lost their hold on Lebanon because the MOU between Iran and the United States created a very strong linkage between the negotiations in Iran and Lebanon. What the peace deal or the agreement between Lebanon and Israel actually completely changed this picture and put the Iranians again outside the picture in Lebanon. I think this is a great accomplishment, and the Iranians would want to bring back Lebanon to the table.
And here you have Ariel Oseran over at I-24 News as well, their senior Middle East correspondent. And he's explaining the perspective of Israel is preparing for an immediate resumption of military operations against Iran, and they will be bringing the U.S. and the Trump regime into that. That is what is being discussed. The information that I am giving you right now, it's why we need an international perspective, is not being talked about on any American media. It's just not, it's being covered up. It's not being discussed at all. And you have Witkoff and Kushner and Trump and Rubio playing a deadly freaking game with all of our lives. Watch what they say on I-24 News, their senior Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseran. Play this clip.
Yeah, that Israel's preparing for the immediate resumption of military operations against Iran. The military top brass has been instructed to draw up plans, and these plans, if are not being drawn up, have already been prepared and are sitting on the table of Israeli decision makers because of what Yaki is exactly describing, that the hourglass is very clear, that the time frame for these negotiations to continue, or let's put it this way, Trump prioritizing negotiations over military action in an attempt to coerce Iran to accept its concessions. Until November, the priority is the diplomatic avenue. After November, all cards are, everything's up for grabs. And so Israel is drawing up these plans saying that they're ready to resume the war against Iran tomorrow. And so this is also Israeli posturing to try and support the United States position in the negotiations, because it is not enough for the United States to present a credible military threat, which it has. CENTCOM commander who visited Israel yesterday and was in Lebanon today said that the U.S. has 50,000 troops currently deployed in the Middle East. That is a very credible military threat. But Israel is joining that threat train, saying that it is also ready to resume military action, hoping that this could potentially lead to a positive breakthrough in the negotiations in the eyes of Jerusalem and Washington. But failure to reach some kind of that same breakthrough, Israel is signaling that it is very much prepared to resume military operations against Iran.
And as you say, very prepared to do so alone if need be.
And that's why I've been explaining to you. I said, here's what Israel Katz said. We're not leaving Syria. And by the way, Israel bombed Syria yesterday morning. Did you know that? I mean, you know that from the MeidasTouch network, and Lebanon and Gaza. Netanyahu makes it clear. Secretary of State Rubio, with whom I have had several conversations, has expressed U.S. support for the concept of a security zone that prevents Iran and Hezbollah from attacking us. Let's be clear. Netanyahu sending a message to J.D. Vance that Rubio and I are undercutting your Iran MOU with the Lebanon MOU that says Israel gets to stay in southern Lebanon and that Iran has no role in the deconfliction cell in Lebanon, which means that the Iran MOU paragraph 1 is rendered completely breached by the Lebanon MOU. That's what I've been trying to explain to everybody, because the way the Lebanon MOU is presented here in the United States is, look, and there's a ceasefire there. No. The Lebanon MOU is intended to destroy the Iran MOU, which Israel and neocons and war hawks in the United States believe was a betrayal to Israel by J.D. Vance. And Israel, Netanyahu and Trump and Rubio and that side want to go back to war. So they did an MOU to create a civil war in Lebanon by creating security zones and pilot zones and trying to put the Lebanese government against Hezbollah, pit them against each other while Israel stays in there and continues to bomb. That's one of the objectives. And the other objective is to remove Iran from having any role in diplomacy in the region, which, when you look at J.D. Vance's statements in Switzerland, Iran had a role, which all this means is this is going to lead back to war. So you have Netanyahu saying that. Netanyahu was showing the map, saying we stay over here. And one of the things they were rolling out, Rubio and Netanyahu, and this should have been in the brief, was the fact that here's our security zones in Lebanon, which is just areas in Lebanon that Israel says it should be occupying. And then it goes, well, we'll let the Lebanese go in these pilot zones. Well, the pilot zones are not areas in the security zones that reduce Israel's presence. They're actually areas that Netanyahu wasn't in. So they add to it and say, well, then we'll take over these pilot zones. And then Lebanon, you can then go into the pilot zones and you can help us get rid of Hezbollah in those pilot zones. That's basically, what's being said there. And meanwhile, Hezbollah rejects this agreement and they say we weren't even asked to show up at the ceasefire discussions. So we're the party that should be covered in the ceasefire. So we're not agreeable to this right here. It should also be noted that Oman notably said we will be charging environmental fees. We will be charging some sort of tolls, not direct tolls like actual tolls when a ship or a vessel, a VLCC passes through it, but we will charge monies in the form of insurance fees or environmental fees, which Rubio claims wasn't happening. But Oman said, we're doing it today. So these are the types of things that should come up in a brief. Here's what Rubio previously said when he was on his Middle East tour to try to destroy the MOU that J.D. Vance worked on. Let's play this clip right here.
Is the current bilateral relationship with Oman now in a good place? And are you convinced they're not playing games with respect to that issue?
Our relationship with Oman is fine. Ultimately, there's not going to be any fees or tolls. There's not going to be any, and they've signed, they were there in the meeting today, and they said it, that they're not in favor of a tolling system. So that's good. I'm glad to hear them say that.
I do have to ask, because...
And then when Donald Trump was asked about all of this today, Donald Trump described everything as, there's going to be talks in Doha, but who knows if they're even going to work, whatever, we'll just see. Here's what Trump had to say. Let's play this clip.
There'll be a meeting on that tomorrow in Doha, and they're going to Qatar. I think they've already left, or they're just about getting ready to leave. So we'll see how that goes, but we're doing very well on that front. But the meeting in Doha is going to be perhaps important, perhaps not. We're going to find out.
Yeah, perhaps important, perhaps not. Maybe, who cares? And then Donald Trump also today was fixated on, this is what he said. He goes, we are winning militarily. It's almost won militarily, I would say. We're winning militarily. It's almost won militarily. What does it even mean? Here, play this clip.
But we're winning militarily. It's almost won militarily, I would say. And it's really very simple. It's the denuclearization of Iran. We don't want them to have a nuclear weapon, and they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. They've agreed to that, in all fairness.
So there you have it, folks. That's what was going on during the conference call. But the goal was to gaslight members of Congress and to hide what I just told you is the truth about what's actually happening. You don't hurt the messenger. I'm just letting you know the truth about what the reality is of this situation. Those are the receipts. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million. Thanks for watching.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.